Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Good to see you guys. Hope you enjoy your weekend. It's quite cold at the moment in Ireland. I don't know where you live. I hope that you're surviving and that you're enjoying this winter and these difficult times. Just to remind you that if you're interested in my book, you have the links available down below, Amazon links. If you're into Kafka, Dostoevsky, Hermann Hesse, Marcel Camus, and you want to support a fellow INFJ, thank you. I wanted to start this kind of informal series on breaking down cliches, because I think that it's all too underestimated how ingrained these cliches are, and if we want to change the conversation about personality, we have to start by working on those. And for the first episode of this series, I have chosen to discuss the topic of extroverted intuition, NE, and the very prevalent idea that NE is scattered. This is something that we hear all the time. One of the things that define extroverted intuition is that it's creative and scattered. And I think that, this perception, in a sense, it is a simplification of something true, but in the way in which it is expressed, it is actually untrue. It is an inaccurate simplification. And the reason why it is inaccurate is that any is a function which, as you know, is a perceiving function, and it's an extroverted perceiving function, intuitive function. As such, any is not an organizing function. If you like, the perceiving functions, there are four of them, NE, NI, SE, SI, are gathering functions, gathering data. What they do is get the data. There's data out there or in there, depending on whether your perceiving function is extroverted or introverted. And it gives the data to the organizing principle of the judging functions. So if you like, what we distinguish as P versus J, or perception versus judgment, we could just easily have called a distinction between G and O, between gathering and organizing. Okay? And as such, NE, just like NI, would be a gathering function. The organizing functions, the judgment functions, TI, TE, FI, are the functions that take the data that the gathering functions provide and make sense of those patterns, okay? In different ways, objectively, subjectively, via thinking, via feeling, and so on. In other words, the organizing duty is really down to the judging functions. It's not down to the perceiving functions. So if you think about the term scattered, what that term implies is that the data is kind of all over the place, right? And that it hasn't been sifted through, that it hasn't been coherently, systematically organized. But this is the very definition of a perceiving function. In other words, if you just look at the work of a perceiving function in an isolated fashion, all by itself, what you're going to find is always this scattered data. You're going to find the scattered data as a result of SE, as a result of SI, as a result of NE, and as a result of NI. Now, the way in which the scattering of the data is performed and is delivered tends to be a little bit different, because if the perception is objective, well, the data will come from the real world, or the outside world, rather, I should say. If if the perceiving is subjective, then the scattering will be internal. And when the scattering is internal, it tends to be a little bit more intensive, because it's instead of like reaching out to the various corners of the world, or of your conscious field, of your perceptual field, it kind of has to reach down into your own being. But if you like, it is scattered as well. Instead of being horizontally scattered, a little bit like SE and NE, it is vertically scattered. You have to reach down into your being, but the scattering is still there. It's just that, if you like, if you were to look at a bridge, right? You have a bridge in front of you. If you were to look at it from one end to the other, it would seem very thin. And it would seem very, like you would only see the width of it, which is quite short. You wouldn't be able to appreciate the length of it, which is why often introverted intuition seems to us not scattered. It's because we actually can't get into the scattered part. The scattered part is within the depth of it, not within the extension of it. Whereas if you were to look at a bridge from the side and you see the extension of it, well, that's more like extroverted intuition. You see the full length of it, because that's the perspective from which you're looking at it. So it's not so much that one function is scattered and the other function is not scattered. It's that the perspective which NE offers you shows the scattering more obviously, because it points at the outside world and you can see the outside world. Whereas the mess that is the data, the scattered data provided by introverted intuition, is not something that you can see from the same angle. You only see the kind of outer surface of it, and it looks more intensive because of that. But there is a lot of scattering, you just can't really see it because it's deep into the person's soul, in a sense. So it is, in fact, reassuring if there is a lot of scattering of data going on, because it means that the perception is functioning. If it's not doing that, then it's not functioning well, okay? And this is something that you can sometimes observe when an INTP has slightly repressed NE, for example, or an INFJ has slightly repressed NI. You see that, you notice that they come across less intuitive, and it can really happen. Now, when it comes to the organizing function, it is possible sometimes that the organizing function, which could be TI, for example, or FI in conjunction with NE, or it could be FE or T in conjunction with NI, it is possible sometimes that it is the organizing function that is repressed. And when that happens, what you will notice is a person coming across as being very creative and scattered in the case of an NE dominant. And in the case of an NI dominant, if their auxiliary function is a bit repressed, their organizing principle is a bit repressed, what you will see is basically a lot of thoughts, a lot of implied thoughts going on in the person's mind, but it's kind of an incapacity to express them. They don't come out as naturally as with an extroverted intuition. They need the organizing principle to be given shape. Now, the problem is that a lot of the time people just assume that because the person is not really able to express those thoughts, this must be synonymous to the fact that there's only a few thoughts or only a little bit of pieces of data, and that they're hard to express. But actually, what is difficult to express is due to the fact that there is just as much of a scattering, but it's a depth intensive scattering. Okay, you just don't see it as much, and so you're led to assume that it's intensive more than extensive, but it's just extensive in a different direction. And what we call scattered applies equally to NI dominance and NE dominance, and just as much to SI dominant and SE dominant, is either the pure functioning of the perceiving function or the work of the perceiving function, which is not being supported by a well-developed, thriving judging function. The organizing principle is either a little bit broken or a little bit dysfunctional, a little bit repressed. It's always in the conjunction of those two that you can really see the scatteredness. But it's not to do specifically with NE or with NI or with any of the perceiving function. When these functions work well, they are always scattered at first. All right, see you guys.